It started with a television I didn't even use anymore. It was an old one, the kind with a thick back and faded glass that made everything look slightly gray. I kept it in the spare room, mostly for nostalgia, sometimes plugging it in when the power went out. The first night it happened, the power had flickered during a thunderstorm. The rest of the house was dark, except for the faint blue light coming from that room. At first, I thought it had just turned itself on. Old electronics do strange things. Sometimes I remember standing in the doorway watching the static dance across the screen. The air felt heavier in that room, colder, like someone had left a window open. But there was no draft. The static cleared for just a moment, long enough for me to see what looked like a news broadcast. Only there was no anchor, no voices, only a still image of a street nearby. I recognized it because it was 2 blocks from my apartment. The picture stayed for a few seconds, then flickered back to static. I waited, thinking it might have been a signal glitch, but the TV didn't even have a connected antenna. The next morning, I woke up to police cars and yellow tape around that same street. A man had been struck by a bus around the same time I saw the image on the screen. I try not to think too much of it. At most, I figured it was a coincidence. Maybe the power surge had triggered some signal bleed from a nearby channel. It happens sometimes. When the weather's bad, I unplugged the TV and pushed it against the wall. The next few nights passed quietly until I woke up again around the same time and saw that faint glow coming from under the door. The TV was on again. The static had cleared, but this time it wasn't a street. It was a dimly lit kitchen and a woman sitting at a table. Her back was to the camera. She wasn't moving. I thought maybe it was some old program rerunning on a forgotten channel, but the way she sat there didn't look acted. It looked real, like someone had left the camera on without knowing it was recording. I turned to go back to bed, but then she moved. She turned her head slightly, just enough for me to see her face, and it was the woman who lived directly across the hall from me. I stared at the screen, frozen, trying to make sense of it. The timestamp in the corner read 1:27 a.m. The next morning, when I opened my door, police officers were standing in the hallway. Her door was open. She had been found dead in her kitchen sometime after midnight. After that, I couldn't sleep. The TV stayed unplugged, but every night it somehow found a way to turn itself back on. Sometimes the screen showed places I recognized, sometimes it didn't, but every time the image that appeared would be followed the next day by a death, a crash of fire, a suicide. It became impossible to ignore. I tried throwing a blanket over it one night, but I could still see the faint light bleeding through the fabric. I tried facing it toward the wall, but the soundless flicker of the screen still filled the room with a presence I couldn't shut out. I even took it out to the curb for garbage pickup, but when I came home that evening, it was back in the spare room, exactly where it had been before. I didn't tell anyone about it at first, because how do you explain something like that without sounding insane? A television that shows tomorrow's deaths, it made no sense. But it kept happening. The images became clearer, sharper, the people more familiar. Sometimes it was someone from my building, sometimes someone I had passed on the street. One night, I saw myself. The screen showed my living room exactly as it was, the same couch, the same lamp, the same faint crack in the wall I had been staring at earlier that day. The camera angle was from the corner near the ceiling, as if something invisible was watching. The version of me on the screen was sitting on the couch, head turned toward the door. My phone was in my hand, and I looked startled. The timestamp read 11:42 p.m. I glanced at my clock. It was 11:40. My chest went cold. I shut off the light and backed out of the room. I could still see the glow from under the door. The hum of the static felt like it was vibrating through the floor. I ran outside into the hallway. My phone buzzed in my hand, and when I looked down at it, I saw the time, 11:42. The door to my apartment creaked open behind me. Even though I hadn't touched it, I didn't look back. I just ran down the stairwell and out into the street. The sound of the storm outside drowned everything else out. When I finally came back hours later, the TV was off completely, but there were wet footprints leading from the front door to the spare room and stopping right in front of the screen. That was the night I stopped thinking of it as a coincidence. That was when I started realizing it wasn't showing the future, it was choosing who would see it. And I had already been chosen after the night I saw myself on the screen. Something inside me broke. The television had gone completely dark for a few days after that. I didn't touch it. I didn't even step into that room. But I could feel it, like it was still alive, still watching. The silence was heavier than the static. It was the kind of quiet that makes you think you're hearing whispers just outside the range of sound. I started sleeping on the couch in the living room. I told myself if I didn't look at it, it couldn't hurt me. But on the fourth night, around the same hour, the blue light returned. The door to the spare room was closed, but the faint flicker painted its edges. The glow was enough to make the shadows in the hallway move. It looked like something was pacing slowly behind the door. I waited, listening for movement, but all I could hear was the soft electric buzz leaking through the crack beneath the frame. When I finally forced myself to look, the screen was on again. This time, there was no image of a person, no familiar street, just a tunnel of static, like it was waiting for something. Then slowly shapes began to, from the picture, struggled to focus, as if the camera were underwater. At first, I thought it was my own apartment again, but then I realized it was somewhere underground. There were tiles cracked and old, and a single flickering light swinging above a shape was standing at the end of the hall. It looked like a person, but something about it was wrong. Too tall, too still. The static blurred its face. Then word began to scroll across the bottom of the screen. No sound, no voice, only letters fading in and out. They read, "He's coming home." The power in the rest of the house went out. The TV stayed on. I backed out of the room, the light pulsing brighter like a heartbeat. I wanted to pull the plug, but the cord wasn't in the wall anymore. It was hanging loose across the floor, yet the screen was still glowing stronger than before. I felt a vibration under my feet, like something moving through the floorboards, a faint thudding sound like footsteps rising from below the foundation. I ran outside and waited in my car until morning. When I finally went back inside, everything seemed normal. The TV was off, the cord plugged back and neatly against the wall. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe exhaustion, maybe I'd fallen asleep and dreamed it, but I couldn't explain the way my car alarm had gone off at 3 a.m. Even though no one was near it. Over the next few nights, the pattern changed. The TV would no longer show random places or strangers. It started showing me small things inside my home: the hallway light, the kitchen sink, the reflection of my own back turned in the mirror. Each time the image came on, the timestamp matched the next day, exactly down to the minute. When it showed the hallway, the light above it burned out the next night. When it showed the sink, a pipe burst, flooding the kitchen floor. When it showed the mirror, I found it cracked. In the morning, the images were warnings, but I didn't know for what they were. Never clear enough to stop anything. I tried throwing the TV away, again driving it to a dump miles away. I left it there under a pile of old furniture. But that night the blue light was back. When I opened the door, it was sitting in the middle of the spare room, screen humming softly, the same words scrolling across again. "He's coming home." I stopped leaving the apartment altogether. My friends thought I had gone quiet because of stress. They didn't know how to help, and I couldn't explain what was happening without sounding mad. The more I tried to ignore the TV, the worse the air inside the apartment felt. Heavy, like the space itself was sinking. I started hearing faint static in other rooms. Even when the television wasn't on, the kitchen faucet hissed like white noise. The refrigerator buzzed in rhythm with it. The walls felt like they were breathing. Then one night, I made the mistake of touching the screen. It had turned itself on again, showing only a black room darker than anything I'd seen. It wasn't static this time. It was absence, the kind of black that swallows light. I felt drawn toward it like gravity was pulling me in. When my hand brushed the glass, it wasn't smooth or cold. It was soft, like skin warm, and slightly damp. I jerked back, but my reflection didn't move. It stayed there, staring at me, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. Then it tilted its head and smiled. The next thing I remember is waking up on the floor in front of the TV. My hand was bleeding, small cuts like I'd been gripping something sharp. The screen was off, but faint fingerprints glowed across the glass. My fingerprints, but stretched longer, distorted, like something had pulled them from the other side. That was the last night I slept in that apartment. I left the next day, moved to a new place across town where I told myself none of it could follow. I left everything behind, even my clothes. I thought I could outrun it. But on the first night in my new apartment, as I unpacked, I found something wrapped in a towel at the bottom of a box. It was small, heavy, covered in dust. When I unwrapped it, I felt my stomach drop. It was the remote. The buttons were worn and sticky from age, but the power symbol had a faint smear of fresh blood on it, my blood. And that night the blue light returned. I stopped trying to convince myself it was just a coincidence. The TV had followed me somehow, even without the screen, even without the set itself. The signal was inside the air now, woven into the hum of the apartment. I could feel it at night under my skin, like a vibration too low to hear. I didn't turn the remote on for days, but every night when I passed by the living room, I saw that faint blue reflection somewhere, that soft shimmer against the window. Even though the TV wasn't there, the light would pulse once slowly, as if something on the other side was breathing in rhythm with me. On the sixth night, I finally gave, and the remote sat on the table, like it was waiting for me. The power button still stained faintly red. I pressed it and waited. The room dimmed instantly. The air turned heavy, and the ceiling seemed to sink lower. The light didn't come from any screen, but from the wall itself, like a projection cast out of nowhere. The image was clear this time, a news broadcast, grainy but familiar, the kind of late-night local report that plays when everyone else is asleep. The anchor looked wrong, though. The skin around her eyes sagged, as if her face had melted slightly. Her voice moved out of sync with her mouth. There was no station logo, no banner, only her eyes staring forward, unblinking, as she said the words, "Another fatal accident is expected tonight." Then the camera cut abruptly to what looked like a dashboard view from a car driving down a narrow road lined with trees. The camera shook gently, as if the driver's hands were trembling. The headlights illuminated a sign bent backward from rust. It read OLD Ridge Road. I knew that road. I used to take it every morning to work before I moved the car slow to curve. And then the camera turned slightly to the passenger seat, where something sat covered with a black cloth. The fabric moved with the rhythm of breathing. The voice of the anchor came back, though her lips were no longer moving. "He sees you too." The video froze. The screen flickered, and I realized the headlights on the screen were reflecting into my living room. Their light spilled over my walls, painting the room in white and shadow. It wasn't a projection anymore. It was like the car was idling just outside. I looked toward the window and saw those same beams sliding slowly across the curtains. Then a horn blared, once long and low, the kind of sound that shakes through glass. When I opened the curtain, there was nothing outside, only the faint smell of exhaust hanging in the air. I unplugged every cord in the apartment, smashed my router, turned off my phone. But the broadcast kept playing. Each outlet glowed faintly blue, like they were bleeding light into the walls. I heard faint laughter behind the static, low and strained, like someone trying not to cry. It echoed through the vents. The apartment next to mine was empty, but I could hear movement there too, the sound of footsteps dragging across the floor, then pausing directly opposite my wall. For 2 days, I didn't sleep. Every shadow in the room stretched toward the same corner where the light from that unseen screen gathered each time I blinked. I saw new flashes of places. I knew the elevator of my old building, the hallway from my first apartment, the cracked tiles of that tunnel the TV had shown me. Weeks before, it was all merging, like every image led to the same dark space. Then came the night the broadcast showed me again. It began like the other, static, flickering sound cut in and out, but this time the picture formed. Perfectly sharp, I saw myself sitting on the couch, remote in hand, same shirt, same room, same shadows, but something behind me was moving slowly, a black shape crawling along the ceiling. Its limbs were bent wrong, jointed backward. The head hung loosely to one side. I didn't want to look, but the me on screen did. He turned slowly, and the figure dropped soundlessly behind him. The lights flickered, and the screen went dark. I stare at my reflection in the blank surface. I could feel the cold air behind me shift. The room went silent, but not empty. My ears filled with pressure, like being underwater. I didn't move. I couldn't. Then something brushed the back of my neck. I ran to the bathroom, slammed the door, and sat against it for what felt like hours. When I finally looked at the mirror, the reflection didn't match me. My eyes were darker, sunken, the pupils dilated, like I'd been staring in a light too long. My reflection smiled, just slightly, then lifted a hand, even though I hadn't moved. The next morning, I tried to tell someone. I called my friend Rachel and told her everything. She came over reluctantly and listened as I explained, but when I pointed to where the broadcast had appeared, there was nothing. She turned the light on and off, looked behind the curtains, checked every wall. She said maybe I was just burned out and needed rest. But when she left, she looked pale, like she'd seen something she didn't want to mention that night. She called me again. Her voice was shaking. She said she turned on her TV and for a moment saw me sitting on a couch with a blue light flashing behind me. She said I looked straight at her through the screen. Then the picture cut to static before I could answer. The line went dead. I tried calling her back over and over, but the call wouldn't connect. The next day, I found out she'd been in an accident. Her car went off the bridge near Old Ridge Road, the same place from the broadcast. They said there were no skid marks, no signs. She tried to stop. I went home and sat staring at the wall. The remote lay on the floor in front of me, the power button blinking softly on its own. That was when I realized it didn't just show deaths, it delivered them after Rachel's accident. I didn't sleep for 3 nights. The air inside my apartment felt like it was rotting. The faint buzz of the unseen signal never stops, sometimes louder, sometimes low, like a pulse hiding behind the hum of the refrigerator. I unplugged everything, but the sound stayed. I even moved the couch to face the wall, so I wouldn't have to look toward where the light always came from, but that didn't stop it either. The light began bleeding through the cracks of the floorboards, now thin, trembling veins of blue crawling up from below. On the 4th night, I heard voices, not whispering, not talking, just a faint rhythm of words without meaning. It was like a radio tune to a language that didn't exist. The walls seemed to vibrate with them, and when I pressed my ear to the plaster, I could hear movement behind it, like someone dragging their fingernails slowly across the inside surface. The next morning, I went downstairs to the landlord's office. I told him there was something wrong with the wiring, something humming in the walls. He looked at me too long before saying the apartment had been empty for almost a year before I moved in because the last tenant had complained about the same thing. I asked what happened to them. He just shook his head and said they stopped paying rent and left in the middle of the night. That night, the blue light came again, but brighter than ever. The entire room glowed like I was standing underwater. I didn't have to turn on the light, appeared by itself, and the image that formed on the wall wasn't a broadcast or a reflection this time. It was a place, a room made of the same cracked tile I'd seen before, the same flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. A single chair sat in the center with its back facing me. The camera moved slowly around it. As if held by an invisible hand, someone was sitting there. The figure was thin, hunched, wrapped in what looked like hospital sheets. The head was tilted down, and the breathing was too slow to deliberate. The light flickered, and when it returned, the chair was empty. I felt air shift behind me, but I didn't turn. My throat locked. The light pulsed once more, and the words appeared again across the floor, this time burned into the wood like glowing scars. "He sees you too." I turned, and the room was empty, but the door was open. Even though I had locked it, the hallway outside was filled with the same blue haze, and I could hear faint static coming from somewhere below the floor. The sound grew louder as I approached the bathroom door. The tiles beneath my feet felt warm. I lifted the edge of a loose one, and underneath was nothing but black, hollow air, and that sound rising like something breathing in rhythm with the static. I dropped the tile and stepped back. The sink turned on by itself. Water poured out, clear at first, then dark and grainy like ash, the mirror fog from the heat. But when I wiped it clean, my reflection was missing. The wall behind me was empty, but faint shapes moved in the glass like shadows caught between the layers of reflection. For the first time, I decided to leave for good. I packed a bag, barely looking at what I grabbed, and left the apartment, unlocked. The city outside looked strange, washed out, like a recording playing at the wrong frame. Rate every car, every face blurred as I walked by. I took a bus to the other side of town, found a cheap hotel, and stayed there with the curtains closed. I left my phone dead, refused to turn on the TV, refused to listen to anything but silence. But silence didn't last. Around 3 in the morning, the sound came again, faint and broken through the wall behind the bed. I pressed my ear to it and heard static just for a moment, then something clearer, my own voice, whispering my name from the other side. I froze, listening. It repeated the name again, but slower this time, drawn out like breath through water. I stood up and backed away from the wall, and saw it, the faint shimmer of blue bleeding through the paint, the signal seeping in like mold, spreading through the structure itself. The hotel manager said no one else in the building reported noise, but he looked uneasy when he walked in my room. His eyes flicked toward the wall, as if he saw the light too. I watched him leave quickly, without saying a word. That night, the walls pulsed in rhythm with my heartbeat, and when I looked closely at the pattern, I realized it wasn't random. The light was flickering in Morse code, repeating the same message over and over again. Come back the next morning. I took a cab back to the apartment. Against every instinct, I had the front door was already open. The air inside was still and cold. The remote lay in the center of the floor, blinking slowly. The walls were covered in faint handprints streaked upward, as if someone had been trying to climb toward the ceiling. Each print was outlined in faint blue dust. The static began again as soon as I stepped inside, and the projection appeared across all 4 walls at once, surrounding me completely. It wasn't a broadcast anymore. It was a room, and I was standing in the middle of it. The same tile hall, the same flickering bulb. The air smelled like burnt plastic and metal, and under it a faint sweetness like something decaying. My reflection appeared again, but not in front of me. It was walking toward me from inside the projection. The head tilted the same way, the mouth slightly opened. The closer it came, the clearer it looked, until I realized it wasn't just my reflection anymore. It was wearing my clothes from yesterday, down to the stain on the sleeve. I stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. Every wall showed the same scene. The figure reached out, and when its hand touched the inside of the projection, the wall rippled like Liquid the hand pressed through, slowly stretching into my room, leaving trails of static in the air. Its fingers brushed the floor, and then withdrew, leaving black marks that didn't fade. The projection flickered violently. The figure was gone. The only thing left on the wall was a single sentence burned into the surface. "You never left the light," cut out completely, leaving me in total darkness. But I could still hear the static, still feel the vibration. Beneath my feet, moving slowly upward, like something climbing from below, and I knew then that the next part wasn't going to happen on the screen anymore. It was going to happen here. I do not remember falling asleep, but when I opened my eyes, the light was already there. That cold, trembling, blue, swallowing everything. I couldn't tell if it was night or day because the color of the room had drained away the walls, the floor. Even my skin looked gray, like I'd been living inside an old film reel. The sound was everywhere, low and constant, a deep static pulse like the heartbeat of something mechanical that had been alive too long. The TV was back, but I don't remember bringing it inside. It was sitting in the corner of the room. Screen facing the wall, still turned on the light. Leaking from behind, it was so bright it carved the outline of the frame into the plaster. When I finally gathered enough courage to turn it around, it didn't feel like a solid object anymore. It was vibrating lightly, as if breathing. I placed my hand on it, and it felt warm and wet, like something living under the surface. The screen showed a hallway. I knew well it was my apartment hallway, but not how it looked now. It was darker, the paint peeled, the lights flickering like candles. The image was shaking, like someone was filming while breathing too fast. The camera turned and showed my own door slightly open, just as it was now. I looked back toward the real hallway and saw that the door was moving open by itself, inch by inch. The hinge, whispering like something exhaling on the other side. On the screen, the camera moved closer and closer to the door until it was right at the threshold. Then it paused and tilted down, showing bare feet standing in the shadows. Just outside, the toes were pressed into the floorboards, as if gripping them. The feet were pale, the nails blackened from decay. The camera stayed there unmoving, as if waiting for me to understand. Then the voice came, not from the screen, but from behind me, a low whisper without direction or breath. Turn around. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the screen, but the image had changed. The camera was now inside my living room, showing the back of my head, exactly as I was sitting at that moment. I watched myself breathe. I watched my shoulders rise and fall, then my reflection on the